I thought that leaders distinguished themselves by rising above their people. That's what I thought. I thought a leader distinguishes himself because he or she rises above the people. It's the cream of the crop. That was a mistake. That's what I thought. You know what I've learned? I've learned that leaders distinguish themselves by rising with their people. And there's a world of difference between those two. Leaders take people with them on the journey. You don't go by yourself. If you're going by yourself, hey, you might be a very self-made, successful person, but you're not a leader. Leaders take people with them. You see, you've got to decide whether you're going to be a tour guide or a travel agent. Travel agents, you know what they do? They give you brochures and tell you all about the trip. They've never even been there. They get the tickets for you and bon voyage and give you a planner and the whole deal, and they send you off somewhere to see. You don't want to be a travel agent. You don't want to be sending people where you've never been. You want to be a tour guide. You want to bring your people along with you and say, let me tell you something. I'm going to take you places where I've lived, what I know, where I've been. I'm going to let you in on the journey. And great leaders, they don't rise above their people. They rise with their people. Now, because I felt that leaders should be separated from others in my younger days, because I felt that leaders should rise above their people mistakenly, the following things happened. Number one, I was lonely. No doubt about it. We've all heard the expression, it's lonely at the top, haven't we? Well, I was at the top lonely. By the way, a leader never said that. You know that, don't you? Because if you're at the top all alone, nobody's following. I'd get off the mountain if I were you. I'd go find the people. You see, but because I thought leaders rose above the people, I had loneliness. Secondly, I seldom asked for help. The reason I seldom asked for help is because I thought it was a sign of weakness. I thought that leaders had to be Mr. Answer Man or Miss Answer Woman, and so therefore, why would you ask somebody for help? Because after all, that would make you kind of like them, and after a while, you could be a commoner if you weren't careful. Thirdly, I was very position conscious. I was making sure that I had my title and my position and quote, my rights. And finally, number four, I was very competitive. I became very competitive in that whole process. And the reason for that's very simple, because I was trying to always beat someone else. Now, all I'm saying, it was just a very simple mistake that I made in my early years, but the mistake was that I thought leaders distinguished themselves by rising above their people, only to find out that leaders distinguish themselves by rising with their people. The second mistake is related to the first. And here it is. Here was the mistake. I thought as a leader that the people should be focused on my agenda. And the lesson I learned was, as a leader, that I should be focused on their agenda. Just absolutely classic. Perfect example is Custer. Now, we all know about Custer and his last stand, June 26, 1876. There are three mistakes that General Custer made that day when he literally led his people into the slaughter. Number one, he put his agenda above the soldiers. And that's a fact. History will bear this out, that he put his agenda above the soldier, because Custer had tremendous ambitions. He wanted to go to the White House, and he saw this campaign as a way to get into the White House, and it was basically a selfish agenda. Great mistake of a leader. Number two, he underestimated the strength of the enemy. He underestimated the strength of his enemy. In fact, the last recorded words as the soldiers began to break rank and go into battle were, "Hang on, boys, there'll be enough Indians for everyone." He left 2 Gatling guns, his most effective weapon, behind because he didn't think that they would need them. And number 3, he didn't prepare his soldiers for battle. Margaret and I just yesterday went and saw the movie We Were Soldiers by Mel Gibson. It's a story of the very first part of Vietnam, and he brings his soldiers into almost a place of slaughter, and he looks at his right-hand guy, and he says, "I feel like General Custer." And he was, feeling very bad because so many of his guys were being killed. But I thought, what a difference between him and General Custer, because in the movie, as he was portraying a real life colonel, in the movie, he looked at his men and he said, "I'll be the first on the field of battle. I'll be the last off the field of battle. And when I go, everybody, dead or alive, of our group will be with me." Classic example of somebody that puts their agenda above someone else's, like Custer, or somebody like in the movie of putting the people's agenda first. Now, what happens when leaders put their agendas above the people? 5 things. Are you ready? Number 1, they become self-serving instead of a servant. That's simple enough. They become self-serving instead of a servant. Number 2, they manipulate people instead of motivating people. Remember, I manipulate you when I move you for my advantage. I motivate you when I move you for mutual advantage. Motivation as a leader is always right. Manipulation as a leader is always wrong. Number 3, they become self-absorbed instead of focusing on others. Number 4, they are image conscious instead of improvement conscious. They're much more concerned about what their image is than whether they're making growth and improvement in their life. And number 5, they place their interest above the people's interest. Simple enough. Now, let me just stop here for a moment, because these are mistakes that I made. When I first started out, of course, my background is pastoring people. And I just want you to know that when I started out, I would look at the people in my church. You know what I'd say to myself? I would say, I wonder how they can help me. I've got this vision. I've got this goal. Here's what I want to do. I want to build this church. And I basically approached my people on, what can you do for me? What can you do for me? And I was constantly saying, how can they help me? Boy, it was a huge day in my life when I learned that if I would go the opposite way, then I would ask the question, how can I help them? How can I add value to them instead of how can they add value to me? All of a sudden, I began to have some huge breakthroughs. You know, in my beginning days, I'd want to sit down as a leader and I'd say, listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. And all of a sudden, I realized that if I really wanted to lead people, I needed to shut up and listen to them. Walk slowly through the crowd, keep my ears to the ground. I used to think that the way to move up to a bigger church was to do good at a small church and then politically work my way up the system till I had the biggest church. And then all of a sudden it hit me one day, no, you don't need to work your way up the system for anybody's church, because you got to wait on somebody to leave before you get it. Here's the thought, John, grow your own and make it bigger. See, all of a sudden I began to understand that. And in your notes, I put this: a leader who desires a long and loyal following must put the interest of his people above his own. That's an absolute fact. Mistake number 3. I thought that charisma was the most important aspect of leadership. I thought, man, if I could just develop some charisma, hello. And I've been around enough boring leaders to say that is a desire that most of us should have. So I thought if I could just have some charisma, that would be the most important aspect of leadership. Well, the lesson I learned is that character was the most important aspect of leadership, without question. Now, in the beginning, I focused on charisma because I know that leadership attracts. Leadership influences people. And so therefore I thought, well, if I'm going to influence people, I've got to develop charisma in my life. In your notes, charisma attracts, but here's what I want you to understand about character. As charisma attracts, character sustains. In fact, I'm going to say this, and then we're going to read for about 5 minutes. I think charisma in the area of leadership is way overrated. So let's talk about character. Are you ready? In your notes, follow along. Character embodies all of who you really are. It's the inner fiber of your being. It is your inner self in action. It reveals what you are truly made of. It's your substance. It is, as D.L. Moody said, what you are in the dark. If you have charisma without character, it's only a matter of time before people find you out. Without character, you cannot sustain meaningful relationships, and without relationships, your ability to lead and influence others is anemic. So what is it about character that really makes a difference? Number 1, character sets you apart. There was a time when people who lacked integrity stood out from the crowd. Now the opposite is true. Charisma can make people stand out for a moment, but character can set them apart for a lifetime. Number 2, character creates trust. Leadership functions only on the basis of trust. In fact, stop there for a moment. In your notes, better underline that statement. Leadership functions only on the basis of trust. If you've read the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership that I wrote a few years ago, one of the laws is the law of solid ground. The law of solid ground says trust is the foundation of leadership. That's exactly what we're talking about here. Leadership functions only on the basis of trust. You pull out trust and you've lost your leadership foundation. Charisma, here we go. Charisma can draw people to you, but it gives them no reason to trust you. It provides no foundation for the future, but with character, you build trust with others. Each time you choose integrity over image, truth over convenience, or honor over personal gain. When is the last time you had a healthy, growing relationship with someone you didn't trust? Hello. The moment that trust is gone, that relationship begins to dissolve. That's true in a marriage. That's true in a business partnership. Isn't that true? Okay, number 3. Character promotes excellence. If you lead people, good character sets a standard for everyone who is following you. People will eventually become like their leader. If leaders compromise on their standards, cheat the company, or take shortcuts, so will their followers. When a leader makes character and personal excellence the goal, then it creates organizational excellence. No team is better than its coach, and no business is better than its leader. Number 4, character gives staying power. During the tough times that all leaders face, character has the ability to carry you through, which is something that charisma can never do. When you are weary and inclined to quit, the self-discipline of character keeps you going. When loneliness threatens to make you compromise, character provides you with perseverance. When temptation comes, as it always does to leaders who have power, it can only be counteracted by integrity. Your values and personal standards, not your ability to make others like you, are the only things that will provide you enough fuel to keep you going in all types of circumstances. Number 5, character extends influence. Charisma by its nature doesn't last long or extend very far. It's like a flash of gunpowder. It produces a quick blinding light, but then it's gone. The only thing left is smoke. Character, on the other hand, is more like a bonfire. Its effects are long-lasting. It produces warmth and light, and as it continues to burn, it gets hotter. Given fuel, it burns brighter, and as it continues to burn, people continue to be attracted to it, and it's light and warmth that can extend to many people. With charisma alone, it's like watching fireworks. The people who witness it may be impressed for the moment, but there is no heat, and light fails to stay with them. If you're currently leading people, you probably have some measure of both charisma and character. The question is, which one are you relying on to lead? The answer can be found in your response to this question. This is a great question. As time goes by, does it get easier to lead or harder? Without character, leadership becomes harder to sustain. You constantly have to perform to get people to notice you, but with character, as time goes by, leadership strengthens, builds, and continues to attract the people. And best of all, the ones who do come to enjoy your fire stay with you a lot longer than the ones who only want to see a show. Good stuff, isn't it, huh? You can go back and read that a few more times. That'll sustain you. There's some good food there. Let's go to another mistake that I made. I thought that my way was the best way. As a leader, I always thought the leaders had the best way. What I learned was that my way was just one way. In fact, I learned that it was only just one way. Sometimes I learned that it wasn't even the best way. One of the most revealing things that happened to me, let me illustrate this to you, is because I'm choleric in nature. I'm sanguine choleric. I use sanguine basically to persuade people. I use choleric for drive and determination and perseverance. And those are my 2 basic temperaments. I have no phlegmatic in me. I've taken all the tests. I never get 1 point in phlegmatic. There's not one bone within my body that basically says, hang loose and wait and it'll come to you. So I have no phlegmatic. I have no melancholy. I have no melancholy. I'm not, the brilliant people are melancholies. They're the artists. They're the musicians. They're the brilliant people. And obviously, if you listen to me, there's no brilliance. So I have no melancholy. I have no phlegmatic. But I have a lot of choleric drive, and I have an awful lot of sanguine that says, let's party, have a good time. So therefore, I thought that the great leaders had to be choleric sanguine. And I'll never forget, Margaret and I were taking about a 4-day vacation. We lived in San Diego. We just went over to the Hotel Del for about 4 days and laid there on the beach. And Margaret read me a book by Florence Littauer called Personality Plus, which Florence Littauer, in this incredible book, basically says that there are 4 types of temperaments, of which, she said, all the temperaments have strengths and all the temperaments have weaknesses. And we laid on the sand, and she read me the book, and we laughed together, and I'd say, oh, mark that, I got to get back to that a little bit later. And basically, by the end of that book, I realized that there's not one temperament that makes you a great leader. People come to me and say, well, I want to be a great leader, but I'm not choleric. Do you think I can be a great leader? And what I found was that you can be a great leader regardless of your temperament. And the classic example, of course, understand my background was ministry and pastoring. When I lived in San Diego, there were highly successful pastors in Los Angeles. Highly successful. And all of them had different temperaments. There was Chuck Swindoll, pastor of the large Calvary church, 10, 12,000 people. I don't know if you ever heard Chuck, but I mean, basically Chuck just sits down, opens up his Bible, lectures for about an hour, kind of has a very dry sense of humor at best. You know, when he gets there, he'll teach it, and when he's done, he'll stop. And everybody else just basically kind of hangs on and says, you know, when he's done, we'll close our Bibles too. And he's got a whole group of phlegmatic congregation. He's got 10,000 of them. Then I looked across town, and I saw choleric John MacArthur. John MacArthur is one of these kind of guys, it's my way or the highway. I mean, he's about as focused as anybody as I've ever seen, and he is strictly choleric. There's no sanguine in him. He never cracks a smile. There's no humor at all there. He just basically says, think my way, and you're going to be very successful, and he's got a church of 10,000. And then there was Jack Hayford, Mr. Melancholy. Jack Hayford, if you ever heard him speak, he has to qualify everything. He's so melancholy, he makes a statement, and then he has to put 3 conditions and 2 qualifications around it to make sure that he hasn't taken it out of context and certainly wants to be fair to you. And his whole message basically is describing one thing that he started off saying in the beginning, and if you hang with him till the end, you absolutely get overjoyed at the end because he finally comes to the conclusion at the end, but it takes 30 minutes to get there. And he has 10,000. And all of a sudden it hit me. Here are these great men with total different temperaments, and they're all successful as leaders. And that's why I put in your notes, because this is huge. Successful leaders are different in many ways. The one thing they have in common, and you got to remember this, because you can go to the bank on this, the one thing that all leaders, I mean, they're different temperament, different personalities, different values, but here's one thing they have in common. They all have the ability to connect with people. They have the ability to connect with people. They have that E.F. Hutton connection that when they say something, people listen. They can connect. It's true about great communicators. It's different styles of communication, but they all can connect with people. It goes back to the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership, the law of connection. What's the law of connection? It says leaders touch a heart, then they ask for a hand. That's what the great leaders do. They touch a heart, they ask for a hand.